Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I've got a pretty interesting one here for you. I've got the man, the moth, the legend, Moth Right, Moth. We're going to talk about Magoo and how you can play around it and what makes it strong, but more importantly, how do you play into it? Common mistakes that people make when playing into Magoo, um, tips and strategies on that. In this video, we have two games from the Sorcerer's Summit that played. I was lucky enough to spectate both of them. One against is Zack Attack, and another one against Kyle. I will leave Moss and Kyle's channel into the description, but enjoy, everybody, and thank you again to Moth for joining me. A lot of really good insights here, so enjoy.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I don't know, just going over kind of some of the notes you sent over.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I do want to preface all of this with is I think understanding your role in a matchup is extremely important. And sometimes even a control player is the aggro player for that specific hand or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that also means you as a aggro player, you're not supposed to be playing creatures.
Used to be, yeah, that makes sense. And but that's really hard to figure out, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of experience, a lot of trial and error get you there.
I don't know anybody who plays more than you, Kyle, and some other people, but man, uh, it's hard to get that experience, especially in sorcery right now. All right. So this game one is a. Do you remember your game with Zach? It was just
Yeah, I do.
I can I just remember it being frustrating watching. It's like, oh, Zach is like just trying to throw as much stuff at you, and it just bounces off. But
Yeah, so like this matchup in particular, I remember planning, like prepping for it. Not so much in my deck construction, but like how to play against it.
mhm.
So I generally tend to mull for things, my three pyres or my um what's it called? That pillar in my hand. If I see even one of those, I'm pretty happy. Yeah, so from Magoo's perspective, like this matchup got a lot easier once I understood kind of how to counter Flamecaller's like game one option. And what I mean by that is like what is their primary plan? So in the Mago matchup, you want to be digging for those sites. You don't actually care about your defensive sites as much as you do the pillar or the pyre in this matchup. How you lose this matchup from Mago's perspective is you get overran, and then once you stabilize, they tap for 1 million and kill you.
So you're saying you don't care about Pyre?
No, I do. That's the
Oh,
thing
okay.
I'm mulling for more than
Oh,
even
okay.
spells. Um,
Graveyard hate in
and
general.
so yeah, against Flamecaller in particular. And once
Okay.
you realize that, the matchup gets a lot easier from Mago's perspective. That said, looking at his hand here, because from last I played, I didn't get to see his hand, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunate that he has both knights. I didn't know that until he played it. I didn't know it was that early that he had both.
No, I think he had some rough draws from what I remember. Like I was very interested in why he tapped for a site on turn three instead of playing a site, which was odd to me. But
Yeah. So, like, can we pause and go back a turn? I
yeah,
just drew Disenchant, but let's talk about, like, what he could have done instead. So, like, I got very lucky there in drawing Disenchant,
yeah. So
but on this turn, like, looks like I played first, right?
yeah,
Um, so I think it makes sense to play the third site, but I would actually, like, looking at my opponent's hand, like, 3 cards, it's unlikely that I have Disenchant. If I haven't played Common Sense yet, so, and at 4 mana, it's pretty likely that I would have started looping it. That means it's very unlikely that I have Disenchant. I think it's actually more correct because you can't really attack into my Root Spider nor my Perilous Bridge. I
yeah. You're
think
just
it's
kind of
probably
sitting
more
back.
correct to start walking up. Yeah, and pressure with Ring. And the reason I say that is, like, at worst, you bury it, but they're not always going to have it. And I'm not representing Double Earth just yet. So, and it's important to understand, like, yes, I have two sites in my hand, but if I'm the aggro player, the thing I'm most worried about is Divine Healing, and I do have it in my hand too.
Yeah, no, you have
But
you have
not
Poison
seeing the
Nova
double
and Divine
Earth,
Healing, the two most broken things for Magoo to do. Yeah.
yeah. But from the other perspective, it would incentivize me to walk forward because I know that I could start chipping in with my avatar with just playing incidental creatures in
When
your
you can.
face.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's at least how I see it. Like, it's important to look at the threshold that Magoo has because Divine Healing is probably the best card in this matchup.
Because it just undoes the whole game up until that point. Like when you can double Divine Healing for 14, you're back at 20, right?
Correct.
All right. Yeah, and then you here you top deck. I think the disenchant. So it's like that whole line of play would just be kind of a moot point, but you can't play around disenchant too much.
Yeah, I'm very much for like make them have it,
Mm-hmm.
especially for control decks, because for the most part, they're not always going to have it. The deck is built around finding those cards with all the cantrips, but that means inherently, like you're not going to see an elite card without some amount of digging every game. It's just not possible.
Yeah. So when you're playing Magoo, do you find I found when I play against Magoo, they lose to themselves more often than not, if that makes sense. Like
Hmm.
the either the threshold gets awkward or they have an awkward site I can exploit, or I actually had a sinkhole one game to keep them on turn, keep them on two sites for an extra turn, and keep them off Poison Nova for an extra turn. So I was able to like kind of snowball from there.
Hmm.
I don't know,
What's the question?
just like playing. Where do you exploit? When can you exploit Magoo's weakness? Like you were talking about divine healing and looking out for their thresholds. Can you exploit when they only have one or two earth threshold? Oh, I keep bringing up
Yeah,
other stuff.
so I think as an aggro player, there are three things you should be looking out for: the threshold, what turn it is, and site placement. Those are the major three things that I think you can exploit as far as it against control in the abstract.
Mm-hmm.
And so, site placement here, as an example, it's very hard for him to attack in because obviously I have a root spider, and the only other site I could move my root spider under. Um, and the perilous bridge blocks that other site, so that's kind of a no-go. But not seeing a third earth threshold means that I can do that incidental damage, so it's worth pouring out my creatures early until I see that third earth threshold. As soon as I see the third earth threshold, though, I might consider not just throwing away my minions because I know they're going to die. Instead, I would be looking to draw a bunch more sites and looking to play them such that, like, if you just look at the field right now, if there was a site at 14 and 6 here, that means either my next site or your next site, um, your being the Flamecaller's deck,
Mm-hmm.
means that I can no longer 2-for-1 you with an AoE spell because they're too spread out. And so I think it's important to understand again what your role is in every matchup and every situation. And in this context, as soon as you can't do chip damage, you should be looking to set up these bigger turns. A large part of that is playing a bunch more sites than you're accustomed to.
That's a hard thing to do. Like if you get practicing your deck and you go, I get to 5 or 6 mana, and then I stop playing sites. I just draw spells. But when playing against a control style list, you need to start playing to the board in the sense of site placement and putting them into weird positions.
Correct. You essentially, the way that Archie gets art advantage over you is utilizing these 5 mana blow up your board spells. But if you put him in a position where it's only tagging 1 or 2 minions, that advantage is basically lost. Even if they rebuy it, it's like they're
It's no
technically spending.
it's no longer a 2-for-1 where you like poison nova get 2 or 3 minions. It's now a 1-for-1 where they're playing, and it's a little
Correct.
bit better than a 1-for-1 where you're playing a minion, they remove it, but you still have another minion on the other side of the board. It's no longer a board wipe. It's just a 1-for-1 removal. It's like a berry.
Correct.
Gotcha.
So another important timing, and this is when Mago becomes very strong, is 8 mana.
Mm-hmm.
This means you should be very wary of Craterize or I guess 7 mana really, because that means next turn Craterize or this turn Blink plus Poison Nova to reposition right. Those are two major things you need to watch out for at 7 mana.
At 7, yeah. So you're at 5 mana
Um,
for board wipes, 7 mana for blink and board wipe, 8 mana for I'm gonna blow up your entire world.
Correct. And those kind of that window is when Mago is strong. And what I recommend at that point in the game is actually instead of playing a site or tapping the draw a sorcerer, I would actually walk forward. And the reason for that is if you go onto a Mago site, their Craterize is going to hurt a lot less because if they hit your site, yes, you lose the site, but you're not taking 10. And if they target their own site, they're probably taking a bunch of damage themselves and also losing a site which, just bought them the Craterize that turn.
Mm-hmm.
I think anytime that you can put Magoo in a position where he's hurting himself, that actually allows for a lot cleaner. I don't want to say one shot potential because it's not, but the magic numbers as far as like killing Magoo, 16 and 12 are pretty reasonable because 4 drops plus grapple plus another like charger gets to that number pretty quickly with like a trinket.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in these red style decks, I think that's what you should be looking for.
16 and 12, and that's like you can there's been a lot of games where I'm 1 point short. It's because I tried to go for it when they're at 17 or something.
Right. And again, if they're incidentally hurting themselves, they might even be lower than that.
Gotcha. And that's like playing a little bit closer and just putting them in awkward positions to play suboptimally. I'm not really sure how the best way to say that.
No, it just makes their primary finishers worse. I think Crater Ice is
Oh,
largely the
okay.
finisher people still use.
Yeah,
Um,
I've seen
and
people kind of fall off of Arcane Barrage, but
mm,
it's still out there.
similarly, I think like I know it's counterintuitive in Sorcerer, but I think you should be moving up as Sorcerer at a certain point too. Like once your game one plan, which is try to overrun Mago, if that fails, once they get to 7 or 8, I would personally advocate for moving forward. So anytime you have like an early blink or something that you can utilize, maybe use it on yourself to move forward. Because once you get onto Mago sites where they are, it becomes very uncomfortable to use their finishers.
And maybe they have to spend an extra turn running away, tapping, moving, or blinking away, and then they don't get to craterize it super efficiently.
Correct. And of course, you're going to know your deck better than your opponent.
Yeah.
If you know that, especially in decks that don't have charge or if they have pebbled path, sometimes I would just trinket up and attack with my sorcerer too. A lot of games that I've won against Mago, I'm just attacking with my avatar,
Because you're doing
and
that
that's
chip
a-okay
damage,
too.
right? You're getting him down to
Yeah,
14, 12, or something. Gotcha.
yep. Setting up for that big turn.
So I'm just want to pause here and talk about the site's placement right now. Zach just quartered and Thias the board and played a Funeral Pyre to 14. I assume that was to like get a site away from your nearby you, and then he played up to one. Where you were saying earlier, if he had an extra turn or two in the early mid game, start playing sites to pressure you with sites. Is that a way to say to like pressuring with sites is a weird concept.
Yeah, and I think that's actually one of the best ways to beat Magoo, actually. It's pressure without attacking. And I think sights is definitely one of ways you can do that.
Okay. I gotta think about that one a little bit more. Pressuring with sites, it's kind of like what Avatar of Air used to do, like turn two sinkhole you back to one, play a two drop, and then now there's two drops punching you, and you're at 1 or 2 mana, and you're like, all right, if I get to three, I can get rid of one of them, but I'm still getting punched. It's that like pressure with sights and denial. It's not. It seems really good.
Hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah, and so like as an aggro player, like especially if you're playing sorcerer, we're so like programmed to just go to 4 or 5 mana and draw.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are actually matching the Mago player, sometimes the Mago player doesn't even draw a side every turn, right? They want to have answers in their hand. That's actually when they're most vulnerable. So if you are forcing them to continue to draw sites, and you're playing sites up in their grill, like let's say they even play forward at 8. So and they go first. If you go 8, 13, then they go 2 to be defensive because that's a gnome at 8. Well, if you go 12, they're forced to go 7 or give you that. And all of a sudden, if you just continue to draw sites rather than spells, you'll inevitably have a line of sites where their sweeper is no longer 2 for 1. And that's exactly where you want to be.
Pausing
But
for
again, I
processing.
think this
Yeah,
is
yeah. That's so
very draw
hard to.
dependent.
Yeah. So if I was
Mhm.
gonna say, if you don't have a super swarm like a hyper aggressive start hand, like I don't know, sometimes you just kill them before they can really do anything. If you're on the play and you just have a super fast hand, just swarming them is a viable option. But if you can't swarm
Correct.
them really quickly, you can play a weird longer game and pressure them with sights.
Yes. And this works for pretty much any aggro deck. You don't have to play all your creatures all the time. You should be honestly waiting a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the biggest mistake that I see against aggro players is like, what's not scary to me is you playing a creature every turn. What is scary to me is you playing 2 to 3 creatures every turn at different locations.
On like a 12 and a 15.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it doesn't feel good to not play something on curve, like if you have a 3 drop on 3. But if it's just going to get removed, why even play it? You need to
Right.
have an advantageous position before you even play that one creature, or else you're just going to play into the control player's hands.
Correct. And one thing to note from the Magoo's perspective, I know it seems like they're doing a lot when they're going common sense for common sense, blinking for blink. They're not actually drawing a lot of cards. It's a third of a card per card that they've played.
Mm-hmm.
So like don't be afraid, like don't feel pressured to play cards just because you're like, oh, they're getting so far ahead. The thing to be scared of is what are they digging into, and it's going to be their best cards if they're a good player. Like I think the worst thing you can do with the common sense loop is use common sense again. You should be using common sense for like a blink to draw to your better cards if you don't have a better card in your hand.
Gotcha. So in this matchup, just I think it's getting towards the end here. Zach did his darndest to try to set up some good turns. You ended up with both rings, and you pillars his arrows to like 12 minute damage away, and you had disenchant. Like it felt like you had all the answers all the time. Do you think there was anything that Zach could have done differently to set it up better, other than like pressuring with sights?
Like I said, I think if I see an early ring on my side, I would feel incentivized to walk forward because it forces me to have an answer right away.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that Magoo is uncomfortable with is having a specific answer for a specific thing all the time. Where it feels happy is like they have a lot of conditional removal. Um, and using that feels very good, but like poison over for 1 minute feels pretty terrible, right? Because it's like semi-conditional in positioning. I say that, but poison over is broken. It's just an example. Like I'm
Yeah,
not always gonna have the bury. I'm not always gonna have the disenchant. And if I
gotcha.
didn't start common sensing like by turn 4, it's likely I don't have common sense.
Makes sense. Hypothetical question: what kind of card do you want to see in the future to maybe have it just to feel better about Magoo, or is there what's your stance on Magoo? I think we're both very aligned on what it is, but I don't know, if you had to give it a sentence or two.
I think there needs to be more utility creatures. Not so much that prevent magic damage. I think that's really lame. I think there's like a lot of hard counters in this game that inevitably there'll be too much that you can't do anything if someone gets like a collection of a few cards, and there's
Mm-hmm.
already kind of that like chance of that happening right now. Um, what I do think is really good from like a design perspective is if we get more utility creatures that interact with the graveyard. So like I've always said, like a 3 power for 3 that on Genesis or attack it exiles a card from the yard. Very innocuous creature, has a lot of counterplay, enough power that it's a threat. Like Bolt kills it, so it's not like
There's counterplay
Archie
to
Archie
it.
can't do
Yeah,
anything.
yeah.
Yeah, but you can't just leave it alone and do your thing.
You have to respect it.
Exactly. And I
Gotcha.
think if we get enough of those cards that tax kind of the resource that Archie's leveraging, then I think it'd be in a much better place. But the inherent problem with Archie is that it's utilizing cards that probably were not designed to be used multiple times. Looking at you, Divine Healing, looking at you, Browse.
Yeah, the 1 mana big impact cards are a little broken when you can do it twice for basically free. Like a second mana is like whatever. But yeah. So and then this game is a game against you and Kyle. Kyle being Scourge Altars on the YouTubes, and he won. I think this is a very similar list to his season 6 winning list of Druid, looking to chip in with Tawny with trinkets and other things. And you had an awkward start here with not hitting Earth until your 4th site or 8th site, or you mulliganed twice and then still didn't have any Earth and drew a site or two and just got your first Earth
Yeah,
here.
it was the 8th site that I saw. So like the 6th site that I drew into after Moles
Mm-hmm.
was my first Earth site. And it didn't help that he had Crusade on too, which is probably the best thing, like outside of Jihad, just because fire minions do something on the way down.
Yep.
And I think this game is a good example of how resilient RG is in both its answers and um, how it deals with things. Um, so, in my mind, as a control player, I've been playing control for a while. Season 5, I won with the Grapple Island list, and even before that, I was running primarily control lists just because it's my playstyle. And the hardest thing to deal with in general is uh, things circumventing your sites or like defenders via movement or things like Crusade or Summoning Sphere. Um, and Crusade and Jihad being the worst because they also buff minions. So your bolts are less effective. Any damage-based removal is less effective.
And then there
So in
you
this
get a
game,
you get a
mhm,
really good Chaos Twister to like remove any pressure. But
right.
uh, to make your point about Crusade, that's why I've really enjoyed Rift Valley. And in my League of Champions, the game I got knocked out in, I had a Rift Valley on 3 and played a charge minion, and then played another charge minion off
Oh
of
yeah.
Rift Valley, and like was able to really pressure into Magoo. But kind of the same story here where he was able to like stabilize and just dominate. It was just a very like, oh, I had it in my grasp, but yeah.
Yeah. And it just speaks to kind of the resiliency of Magoo. So like in this circumstance, again, I have a damage-based removal in my hand right now, but it's pretty ineffective against his beef chonky dudes, especially under Crusade. Um, but just the amount of like unconditional removal in Chaos Twister, etc., is especially because Chaos Twister can randomly 2-for-1,
Hmm.
is extremely punishing, which is unfortunate. Like without Chaos Twister here, I think I would have probably lost, but it could have been like a Nova instead or whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
So this site positioning of yours, where you have six tight sites like that, that's like exactly what you kind of what you want, because then you're not beholden by any area restrictive spells, right? And you're not going to give him a site on 10 to attack.
Correct. So like I play it normally you would probably want to play that at 1 if you wanted to reduce the attack surfaces that the opponent can attack in, but he's not on charge, so I don't care to give him a site because generally speaking he's going to play a thing and then I can deal with it sort of thing.
Hmm.
Just because of the colors. And that's why I was not afraid to play 7. I normally probably would have played 1. But it also makes sense to play at 7 if I haven't drawn or seen any like sweepers here. So keeping my sights together means that if he randomly gets a minion at 1, I'm not spreading myself thin on movement or like a sweeper that can't kill everything.
Yeah, and when I've played Magoo and I felt like I've lost is when I get put in those weird positions of I can't reach one and I can't and reach seven at the same time. It feels very like trying to touch everything, but it gets awkward. And then what do you think about
Mhm.
him here, like attacking with his avatar, like you were saying earlier?
I think it's very smart. Um, I've already burned Divine Healing in this game. That's kind of another reason that got me back. Like Magoo's busted, obviously. Like he presented incredible pressure ahead of curve um, in Crusade and buff minions. But like even behind in tempo, you could reset that tempo with a 1 mana spell. Um, it's kind of not fair. Um,
Yeah.
but no, I think attacking with the avatar is honestly a great strategy, especially if you have trinkets. I think most decks should be running trinkets if you're running creatures anyways.
Yep.
Um,
I think most of my
and
decks sit around two or three trinkets.
mhm,
And then another chaos twister for another minion removal. And so at this point in the game,
yep.
Kyle has almost like burned his minions. He has his hand is minion payoff, more minion payoffs, and a minion removal spell that doesn't count. So
Mhm.
you at this point have essentially stabilized. You have ring or egg to like kind of slowly come back, and now you can just do Magoo things.
Yeah. And one thing I want to emphasize about this game, um, from the Magoo's perspective, like I've been holding on to that Wizard's Den forever. And the reason for that is if you're dealing with Burrow or whatever, I had the other Chaos Twister in hand or other spells, like it can cast any magic spell. And so now that I had the Famine, I don't care as much, but it was just a way to snipe, like specifically in this matchup, any Burrowers or any subterranean minions,
Gotcha.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. And then I really do like the Air Earth Druid into Magoo because you're playing Crusade and not Jihad, Gigantism, like the one you have in hand kind of thing. Because
Mhm.
then you have Grapple Shot and you always have Tawny usually sticking around. And it represents a turn where you can deal 12 damage with Tawny, or maybe you have a Cattle Top just sitting around or something.
Mhm.
I don't know. It has the capability of doing the big explosive turn.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think there's certainly. So I actually think this is probably Archie's best matchup,
Okay.
and that is not that is not to say that it can't win. Obviously, Gigantism, like everything you just described, are very harsh threats to deal with, like Gigantism being the biggest one.
Hmm.
But the way that I evaluate decks and Archie in particular isn't so much like, can I always win against this matchup, or like how often can I win? It's, is this even or better? And I would say this matchup is better and probably pretty good because how likely are you to draw Gigantism in most of your
Yeah,
games
it's like you're gonna
versus
get
me
it
drawing,
1 in 5 probably.
right, versus me drawing my big killer spells because my deck is designed to draw through my entire deck.
Yeah, like you're at, normally ending on like just above 20 spells left in your spell book, right?
Right, and that's not counting browse too, right? Like
Yeah, and you can burn through
if you double
14.
browse, you're gonna see.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you can find crater eyes, you can find the ring, you can find whatever the hell you want. It's just yeah.
yeah. I would say if there were more effects like Gigantism in this deck, I would be far more afraid. But I'm happy to lose to the unique. Like if you draw your big unique, great. You probably get me with it, but more likely I draw my toys first.
That's I mean that's the whole point of Archie, right? Is to draw the all the cantrips, all the blinks, all the 2 mana draw thing is to
Mhm.
like it doesn't feel like you're doing it, but like you've said a couple times, it burns through all the dead cards to find the good cards.
Yeah, and I
Where
think Kyle makes a big mistake here on his turn here. He played the Pudge, and I don't know if you realize that was a perilous bridge that we're standing on.
yeah, no,
And he has no means to really.
I think I chimed in on this point. It's like, are we aware this is a perilous bridge? And he said he did. So I think it was like he was trying to set up a cheeky grapple shot move pudge kind of play, like make you not worry about
Mhm.
Pudge Butcher.
Yeah. So I have
Yeah.
a question for you actually. So
Okay.
I made the play of playing my Gigantism here after he played the Pudge. So he played Pudge on his turn. My turn was um, I play Gigantism, I drew Ring, and I attacked with the Kettle Top. If I had drawn a spell I could double spell, especially with Merlin's Tower in my hand, would you have held on to the Gigantism or burned it here?
I think I would have done this exactly the same thing you did. I was trying to because I was remember watching this and it's like there was one turn where you didn't play Gigantism and I expected you to. Um, I don't know if you don't play Gigantism, Kettletop's dead, and then you have it on Magoo, and then you attack with Magoo, which is, I mean, it works, but it felt weird. I don't know.
Yeah. Like the Druid being on top of me, I think is interesting because that means I could just attack him.
Hmm.
Um, but what it also means is like once I do use Gigantism, if he just flips the Druid or flips the Druid here, he could block my next attack once he kills Kettletop.
Hmm. No, I think you spent it at a your best point, but also I'm more aggressive than you are, so I tend not to hold on to things as long as you do. Gotta get better at that, but yeah, I don't know. And then I do like Kyle being like right on top of your site just because, like you said before, Crater Eyes now looks weird. And if you didn't have Angel's Egg,
Mm.
it you would have been a little bit lower. And then so trying to, you can still do the damage with Gigantism since you're a little bit higher and like heal out of it, but it makes it a little bit worse. But also,
Yeah,
Kyle's been on 5 mana this entire game. I felt like it's like you're at 8 and he's at 5. Just a mana difference it makes it hard.
yeah, I agree. I think, and one thing to note too is like sites aren't just sites. A lot of them are effectively spells too.
Hmm.
Um, and I definitely think that was a mistake this game too. I would have probably leveraged more sites, not just because of Tawny, but um, just to spread out your minions, like I was saying. Like you already have a Crusade there, so you have access to 4 sites. Like imagine that you're also threatening to, like I can't. There's no way I could do that. Like deal with things all over me, all the sites.
So like you could have like played 11, 6, and 1 and attack 2, played it to 15, attack 10, or played up to 4. And at that point, everybody is spread out. Nobody's nearby each other, and it makes it hard for you to deal with everything.
Yeah, like how awkward would this Craterize be if I had to like, because one of the great things about Craterize is like incidentally killing your creature or killing your creatures and incidentally doing damage to you, right?
Hmm.
But if he had played Rift Valley at 2, moving my site to 1, all of a sudden he could put sites at 2 and also 15, and there's no way even Craterize kills that stuff.
Just because the
And that
damage fall
also
off.
means I'm probably taking damage. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think this is about, yeah, we're about over, but closing thoughts on playing into Magoo. What I think I sent you some ideas. Let me go look at that. Common misplays. I think we kind of talked about is that one minion a turn just gets removed, and then you go, what the heck happened?
Yeah. And again, that comes down to just understanding your role in the matchup. Like your initial game plan, as much as you want to swarm a Magoo or a control player, shouldn't like you might just not have the hand for it.
Hmm.
And when that occurs, you need to be able to recognize that and understand that you're actually on the back foot here, and you need to pressure them in other ways.
The one thought I had too was, what do you think about site destruction into Magoo? CJ was talking about it earlier, of just like going hard on site destruction, like with sinkholes and ablazes and the big 7 mana kill everything stuff.
So, um, basically, I think it's a losing proposition.
Hmm.
I think and the reason I say that is if you're spending your turn um, burning my site, and if I tune my deck like I did for this tournament where I'm running like 4 kettle tops, I really don't care if I lose sites,
Yeah.
especially if I'm not running like as much heavy threshold stuff. It really depends on the list for the Archimago, but like this time around, I ran a very clean list where I didn't care if my sites were destroyed. Um, that said, I think if you can leverage the tempo that it provides you really well and the Archie can't respond, and I think most lists can't, I think it's viable. But again, that's only if they don't prepare for it.
Hmm.
Once the Archie prepares for it, it's not nearly as taxing to them.
And then win conditions on Magoo is generally craterize. Is there anything other than craterize as like this is what I'm working towards to win with? Other and there's the arcane barrage, but arcane barrage is a little weird as well.
Yeah, I think one underutilized strategy for sure is as weird as it sounds, big minions. It's really bad in the mirror, but if you are having trouble with Battle Mage or Avatar of Earth, my God, Vampire and Titan are so good. You can just run a one of grapple and like their day is ruined.
Double grapple for
Like if you
6.
if you
Ugh.
go turn dude, if you drop a Merlin's Tower at 6 or at 7 and you play Titan grapple on the same turn, I guarantee you they're not having a good time.
Oh, that's so much pain. And then the main, I think the main takeaway I want to communicate to people watching is pressuring Magoo with sights. So if you're an aggressive deck, you initially try to swarm. If you can't swarm, you play sights to make them like spread out and have multiple avenues of attack and keep everything spread out is the main goal.
Yeah. And the other added benefit that I didn't really talk about by doing so is that the Magoo player doesn't want to be boxed in. And as an experienced Magoo player, like you sometimes it's okay to be boxed in, but for the most part, like you want to avoid it, right?
Yeah,
It incentivizes them to draw a lot of sites, which means it's less likely they're going to have answers for you. Don't always assume they have answers for your stuff and test if they do.
gotcha. Well, that's all I got. I got to think about this some more. Any last points? But thank you so much for explaining the Magoo enigma to me.
Yeah, no worries. I think there's a lot we could probably still talk about as far
Yeah.
as like what Magoo could do, but I'd rather avoid that conversation
Yeah,
just because I
there's
don't
been
know how.
there's been a specific reason I don't play or I haven't shown off Archimago on the channel before. It's just because if I start showing everybody that information, then that information disseminates much faster, and then this problem gets exacerbated.
Yeah.
But
I also think there's just such a charm in under like if you're picking up a deck for the first time, not understanding all the play patterns, I think it's really cool learning it. And while it is Archie Mago's time to shine right now, some players do love it. I personally hate it because I think it's like too strong. I think it is cool that they get to see all facets and kind of learn on their own. While there isn't content for Archie right now.
yeah, no, I like my aggressive and mid range stuff. This control nonsense, I'll leave it to the birds. All right, thanks, Moth. Thank you so much.
Yep.